Okay, it's June 8th, 2020, and one of the big shoes just dropped. And I didn't put on a collared shirt and I didn't shave because this news is too big. I didn't want to waste a second. All right, what is the news? Let's see if I can get this in front of me so I can read it to you. Oh, there we go. Okay. Here we go. The World Health Organization says that asymptomatic spread of coronavirus is very rare. Just like I and hundreds of other people have been saying since this started. The myth of the asymptomatic super spreader is Tony Fauci classic bullshit. So I'll explain this in a little bit. People have heard me throw this guy's name around a lot. Hopefully you've watched the films, but you probably have more important things to do. On the other hand, this information is important, so I'm going to, after I've made about 8 hours worth of films on this topic in the last 3 months, I figured out how to explain it to you really concisely. But let me finish reading this article on the World Health Organization. Coronavirus patients without symptoms, asymptomatic, are not driving the spread of the virus. Andrew Cuomo, what other idiots do we have? The governor of Illinois, Gavin Newsom, World Health Organization officials said Monday, casting doubt on concerns by some researchers that the disease could be difficult to contain due to asymptomatic infections. First of all, to call this an infection is bogus, okay? Just because somebody's tested positive on an antibody test, on an unreliable antibody test, does not mean they have a COVID infection. All it means is they took a test at one period of time, and it may or may not have been accurate, and it may or may not have shown that they had antibodies of some kind possibly related to this thing they're calling COVID. That's how tenuous these cases are. And to call them an infection, and that comes out of Tony Fauci's mouth every time he talks about somebody that's been tested positive, or if you've got a cough and a fever, you've got COVID. Did you know that? Yeah, presumptive COVID. So every time Tony Fauci talks about COVID infections and they're on the rise and there's millions of them, filter that bullshit through reality. Okay. Some people, particularly young and otherwise healthy individuals who are infected, bad use of language, by the coronavirus, never develop symptoms or only develop mild symptoms. By the way, I believe I had the coronavirus. I think it was in February. For 2 days, I was tired. I had this light fever that came and went, and I got winded easily. It lasted 2 days, no big one. I'm fortunate I'm healthy. Others might not develop symptoms until days after they were infected. Preliminary evidence from the earliest outbreaks indicated that the virus could spread from person-to-person contact even if the carrier didn't have symptoms. So preliminary evidence from China, also from, I don't even know if the Italians made this claim. Do we believe anything that comes out of China? Now, I've got all respect for Chinese people and Chinese culture. Chinese institutions filter through the US news media? Talk about dog crap. Anyway, preliminary evidence from the earliest outbreaks just indicated that the virus could, and maybe I could fly to the moon tonight for dinner and be back in time for bedtime. Spread from person-to-person contact even if the carrier didn't have symptoms. That's what the preliminary evidence I'd love to see this preliminary evidence. You know what? The beauty of the internet is it all exists. If somebody is motivated to go back and trace this cataclysmic cluster fudge created by the news media and Tony Fauci and all his friends and our idiot politicians, you can trace it and see exactly how this thing went down. But anyway, let's go forward. But World Health Organization officials now say that while asymptomatic spread can occur, and yes, you can get struck by lightning and win the lottery on the same day, it is not the main way it's being transmitted. You know, they're trying to cover for themselves. It ain't transmitted that way, period. Look, you got to be, you know, every other disease on earth, you have to have symptoms. You have to be coughing. You have to be, like they say, stay home. Don't go to work. Don't go to school if you're sick. Don't give it to other people. If you're so not sick that you have no symptoms, you're not going to spread anything to anybody. All right, from the data we have, it seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual. Now that you have to go to a medical school or Harvard and get a PhD in biochemistry to be able to write. It still seems to be rare. They want to keep the possibility that it could mutate, right? And you know, that's always, according to Tony Fauci, that's always a possibility. The viruses can always mutate. So it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person can actually transmits onwards to a secondary individual. Dr. Maria van Kerkhove, head of the World Health Organization's Emerging Diseases and Zoonosis unit. That means illnesses of animals. At a news briefing from the UN agency's Geneva headquarters. It's very rare. However, because everybody needs a job, more research and data are needed to, quote, truly answer the question of whether the coronavirus can spread widely through asymptomatic carriers. And we also have to count how many angels there are in the head of a pin. That's a project that'll keep us all really busy. We have a number of reports from countries that are doing very detailed contact tracing. They're following asymptomatic cases, they're following contacts, and they're not finding secondary transmission onward. It's very rare. And who started this bullshit? April 1st. No coincidence. By the way, that was supposed to be the end of the quarantine. Remember? It was supposed to be 2 weeks. We're now going into month 4. So on April Fool's Day, the CDC, the good old CDC that gets everything wrong, cited the potential for, this is pure Tony Fauci, the potential, and I understand he works for NIH, but believe me, they're all one big happy family, the potential for pre-symptomatic transmission. In other words, if you've got even a molecule of this stuff in you, you're infected and you're going to get sick and you're probably going to die. That's why we call you pre-symptomatic. And on and on and on and on it goes. I hope you'll read the article. All right, Tony Fauci, since you might not have time to watch all the films. He's had the same job for 36 years. This year it'll turn 37. I only know one other US federal government bureaucrat in history that had the same job through 8 different presidents for 37 years, because it's going to be 37 years this year. J. Edgar Hoover. He was a straight player, right? He was a reliable guy. All right, so this guy's a politician, okay? He's not a doctor and he's not a scientist, okay? What he has is a very cushy job. By the way, he never had to go to any kind of congressional hearing. He's not appointed by the president. He's appointed by the head of the NIH, and he has managed since 1984 to make sure whoever was the head of the NIH was in his pocket and was appointing him. And what does he get for being head of this division of the NIH, infectious disease and allergy? Well, number one, of the 1.4 million federal employees on the federal payroll, he's the number 3rd highest employee. Think about that. Think about what kind of a scheming politician sleazebag you have to be to crawl to the top of that mountain of dung. And he's right up there. Interestingly enough, I think the NIH head is number 1. But number 3 out of 1.4 million people. Pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. Also, he is allowed to get, and I don't know if I mentioned this on the last call, he's allowed to get honorariums and speaking fees and awards and all kinds of things. And if you go to the internet and go to YouTube, you'll see this dude is getting an award, it has been getting an award every week practically his entire career. And a lot of these awards have cash attached to them. For example, University of Albany gives an award for medical innovation, $500,000 straight to the hip pocket bank of Tony Fauci. So he's got this side gig of getting fees. Now, does he get it because he's a great doctor? Well, he hasn't seen a patient in decades. Does he get it because he's a great scientist? Well, he's managed to put his name on a bunch of papers, but coincidentally, they're all NIH funded papers. So if you want your paper funded, yeah, you make sure you put Tony's name on it. So he hasn't really participated in any science, but he has been busy as a politician. And he controls the spigot for all research money in the United States. That's a lot of money dedicated to infectious diseases. And if there aren't any infectious diseases out there, he'll make them up. And now let's talk about AIDS, because Tony Fauci is famous for AIDS. He's the hero who solved the AIDS crisis. Except he promised a vaccine in 1984, and it's 2020, there's still no vaccine. And he promised a cure around the same time, and there's no cure. There is a lifetime of drugs they put these poor people on. And who are the people that go on AIDS medications now? A lot of Africans, a lot of poor Africans, a lot of African Americans, a lot of pregnant African American women, and a lot of newborn African American babies. Now, people are in the streets right now. I think they've got a good point, by the way. But if they wanted another reason to be in the streets, it would be over that. But see, nobody's aware of it. Everybody thinks, oh, this AIDS thing is just fantastic. Tony Fauci is Mother Teresa mixed up with Santa Claus. No, Tony Fauci is one of the greatest pump and dump big pharma promoters that ever lived, maybe the best that ever lived. And it's a pretty easy thing to prove. The theory that Tony Fauci has pushed since 1984, along with, you started with a little band of friends, now it's many, I don't know how many, it's an industry. I mean, it employs thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It is the political backbone of a lot of people, including Nancy Pelosi. Got a little video of her saying that was her first speech in Congress, was in support of HIV AIDS research. So their theory was that AIDS was an infectious disease caused by a virus. And it was a diabolical virus because a lot of people had it and didn't know they had it and were spreading it. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. And what did the truth turn out to be? Well, the truth is still hidden under a mountain of bullshit. But if you had a chance to talk to people like Kary Mullis, who was the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry in 1993, he'd very clearly tell you that that story was bullshit. If you talk to Luc Montagnier, who actually got a Nobel Prize for discovering, or supposedly discovering, the HIV virus, he's not so sure that the virus causes AIDS. Okay? So there's a lot of very serious, hardcore scientists who flat out say no. that theory that HIV causes AIDS is bull. But we have the super spreaders, supposedly, right? And mothers give it to their children. That's why you have to put pregnant women on powerful antivirals, and that's why you have to immediately give their newborn babies powerful antivirals, which are all carcinogenic, by the way. And when they ran out of victims in the United States, they went over to Africa, and they found people who were malnourished, had multiple parasitic diseases, which is not uncommon in a tropical environment, had malaria, had environmental stress. In other words, people in really bad shape, they declared, hey, you've got AIDS. Kind of like the old AOL, you've got mail. And they cooked up a bogus test, and we made a film on that. You should watch it. That demonstrates the AIDS test, complete fraud. Doesn't test for AIDS, doesn't even test for HIV. It tests for the existence of a wide spectrum of antibodies, one of which possibly is stimulated by this thing called the HIV virus. That's it. And so meanwhile, they went around and told the whole world of people that tested positive for AIDS, you've got, for HIV, you've got an HIV infection, and you will get AIDS, and you will die. But we have these handy-dandy antivirals that you can take, one of which was a drug called AZT. And some researchers estimate that AZT killed between 200,000 and 500,000 people. If you think that number is impossible and out of the realm of possibility, look up Vioxx by Merck. This was a headache remedy that they knew caused heart problems. And the estimate, before they shut it down, it killed between 200 and 500,000 people. So it's very possible to put out a drug that kills people in large quantities. So you might say, well, everybody makes a mistake, and, don't be so hard on the guy. He's like a really nice grandfatherly guy, and, he speaks in such beautiful, sweet tones, and he's so reasonable. And okay, we know, because I looked into it, and so have other researchers. General public doesn't know, the idiot news media certainly doesn't know, and our idiot politicians certainly doesn't know that the very first group of AIDS victims, and they were sick, and their immune systems did collapse. No question about it. Terrible disease. Tony Fauci, and I'll have the video up soon, but just tell you now. We got video of him in 1984. We got video of him in 1992. We have video of him in the 2000s. We have video of him last year giving the same line. These were young, otherwise healthy, young gay men. Okay? Young, otherwise healthy. And that's how they knew it was a virus, because these were healthy guys. So if they were sick, it must have been because of a virus, and the virus must be transmissible. And it's a weird virus because you get it 1 year, but you don't show symptoms until 5 years later, and then you don't die until 10 years later. It's wily. It's a wily virus. Well, the truth is that original batch of guys that got this, it's not a mystery they got it. They were all, first of all, the average age was 38. And I'm sorry, guys who were 38, you're not young anymore. You're going to be 40 soon. You're not kids anymore. 38 is long enough to ruin your body. Every one of the original cases was a serious drug abuser. Alcohol, cigarettes, cocaine, speed, downers, and a drug that I've learned about unique to that subculture, and it's a tiny subculture of the subculture. It's not like every gay person in the world, was living the way this group of guys was living, but every group's got their lunatics, and these guys were heavy-duty drug users. A very common drug in that circle was something called poppers, and poppers my understanding is in the old days, you'd break something, and the fumes would basically open your heart up to keep you from getting a heart attack. So they had a medicinal purpose. And then they were abused obviously, and then made prescription only. And then some miscreant in Indianapolis in the early 70s changed the formula slightly so that it was no longer illegal and started selling them by the truckload. And I mean by the truckload. In 1970s dollars, $50 million a year. Apparently every club sold them. Some clubs had their own house brand, and guys would be breaking these things and sniffing them all night long. Well, it turns out that this drug, amyl nitrate, is an immune suppressant. An immune suppressant. And what were the diseases that, remember, I don't know, you wouldn't remember, but if you were a news hound and you followed the news very closely, or if you're a researcher and really researched it, you would discover that the original AIDS diseases were two. One was something in the lungs, and one was a thing called Kaposi sarcoma, okay? The lung thing was like a fungal overgrowth, right? Well, if you're huffing an immune suppressant 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 times a night, and you're going out 4 or 5 or 6 times a week, and you do that for years, and you're drinking and you're drugging and you're, I don't want to be graphic here, but catching every venereal disease on earth and then being treated with antibiotics, do you think after 10 to 15 to 20 years of that, your body's going to pretty much say, I'm done? Yeah, that's what happened. The other disease, Kaposi sarcoma, is something that old guys get, and it's like black blotches on the skin. Not a fatal thing, it's just a thing you get when you're older, if you get it. But these guys were getting it, guess where? In their nasal passages, in their mouths, in their throats. And then it was spread from there. Do you think if you're huffing a powerful immune suppressant 5, 10, 15, 20 times a night, 5, 6, 7 nights a week for years on end, you might ruin the immune system in your nose, your throat? Now, remember, Tony Fauci said, young, otherwise healthy. He could have gotten it wrong in the early days, right? Couldn't blame a guy for that. How did he get it wrong later when dozens of studies came out on these substances and how immune suppressive they were and how dangerous they were? How do you miss that? The other thing is, if you watch the videos, Fauci loves to talk about what a great bedside doctor he was and how he ministered to the sick, and this was the darkest days of his life. How do you treat people that sick and not know that they're drug abusers? Do you not ask them any questions? Do you not make any inquiries into their lifestyle at all? Apparently, some of these guys were so hooked on these poppers that while they were dying, friends would bring them poppers and they would do them in the hospital while they were dying. But somehow Fauci missed that because AIDS comes from a virus. Okay. And that virus is transmissible. Okay. And you can have it and not know you have it and spread it. Okay. And that means everybody can get it. Okay. And that means we've got to spend billions and billions of dollars through Tony Fauci, the guy who controls the infectious disease and allergy division of the NIH. Now, think of what you control when you control that money. You control all the medical journals. You control all the researchers, because research is not an entrepreneurial thing. You got to get grants, and there ain't a million people you can get grants for them. There's like a few. So if you control the grant money, you control the researchers. If you control the researchers and the grant money, you control the universities. I mean, talk about a choke point. He had it. I think that's why he kept the job for 36 years. It's a pretty nice position to have if you're what he is. I'll leave it up to you to describe what he is. And there's something else you control when you're Tony Fauci. You've got, I think, 7 divisions under his organization within the NIH. Each one has its own communications director. That's just the director. It doesn't count the employees. In his private office, his personal office, he's got a director and a deputy director of communications. Okay, so let's say it's just 10 people. I'm guessing it's probably more like 50. You know, by the time you count the graphics arts people and the copywriters and, you know, the PR people and all that. But let's just say it's 10. 10 people working 40 hours a week is 400 man hours per week, every week, every year, for 36 years. Who's countering? And then so they're going straight to the media with their elaborate, exciting stories of death and destruction and why we need to listen to them and why we need to give them more money and why we need to do what they say. 400 hours a week, minimum. 400 hours a week. I could get a lot done with 400 hours a week. I bet you could too. Who's countering the 400 hours of bullshit that's coming out of Tony Fauci's office? Because we got the news media, and God bless them, they are the laziest, most useless bunch of human beings on earth. They want everything beautifully tied up in a nice, neat package, and if you do that, they'll jump through hoops for you, assuming you're telling the story that your owners want told. So who was countering the bullshit coming out of Tony Fauci's office? And I think I'm lowballing the 400-hour estimate. It could be 5, it could be 1,000 hours a week. You can spread a lot of bullshit with 1,000 hours a week. And don't forget, there's the network effect too. He's not cold calling the New York Times or the Washington Post or the CNN science reporter. He's known these people for years. He's had 36 years to build up his propaganda network. And he's got a good-sized staff to fill it. And there's nobody countering it. You see how we got to where we are? So the parallels between the AIDS fraud, and I think it's fair to call it a fraud because he claims that he was the personal private physician to dozens of that original group of AIDS sufferers. Right? So either he's the stupidest doctor that ever lived, or he's lying. He claims to read, you know, like a real serious scholar, yet he somehow missed the dozens of papers talking about amyl nitrate poppers, their intense immunosuppressive qualities, and the fact that every single person in that original AIDS group were all poppers abusers. All of them were. So what did he do? He took a phenomenon, a medical phenomenon. He blamed it on a virus. He claimed the virus was transmissible, easily transmissible. I'm old enough to remember Oprah Winfrey getting on TV in 1987 and saying that by 1990, 1 out of 5 Americans would be dead from AIDS. Look it up. She said it. Where did she get that information from? Think about it. Who else is in the business of spreading information about pandemics in America? The other myth that he used back in the 80s, and he used again this time, is the myth of the asymptomatic super spreader. You got the virus, you're infected with it, but you don't know it. And you're out there. Nobody suspects you because you look normal and you look healthy, and you are normal and you are healthy, but you're harboring the deadly virus. And everywhere you go, you leave a stream of highly contagious COVID in the air. Therefore, we all have to wear masks. All of us. Not just sick people, not just people taking care of sick people, but everybody's got to wear a mask, and everybody's got to shut down their business while we wait this thing out. And now we find out on June 8th that, oops, that asymptomatic super spreader thing, that wasn't really true. And by the way, the other connection between the AIDS fraud and the COVID con is you have to suspend all common sense and all previous knowledge of biology for COVID to make sense, or for AIDS to have made sense. But Tony covered that, remember? At the very beginning he said, it's a very unusual virus. We've never seen a virus like this. That's kind of literally true. Every new virus that comes along, we've never seen before. That's why they're called new, or novel. And I believe AIDS was originally called a novel retrovirus. What else? What other parallels are there between his AIDS fraud of the 1980s and 90s and all the way through to the present and the current COVID con? The testing. And the testing is really simple. You cannot test for the disease. You can only test for the virus. And you can't test for the virus because there is no test that shows the virus. Like your blood is not coursing full of, viruses. Or certainly not the HIV virus, and certainly not the COVID virus, right? It's not like they take the blood and they look under a microscope and go, oh my God, there's the virus. No, that's not how it works. They look for antibodies because they can't find the virus in human beings' blood. They couldn't find, and this may sound crazy, guys. You look it up. Don't believe me. Assume I'm making this up, but do look it up. No one has ever found the HIV virus or the COVID virus in somebody's blood. All they have found is antibodies, non-specific antibodies that could indicate the one-time presence of the virus. That's the level of specificity and reliability these tests have. Okay, so in the AIDS days, they encouraged everybody, I remember I had to get life insurance once. Bettina and I had to get AIDS tests. They called it, and that's what they called it. We were sweating it because I didn't know any of this stuff back then. We're like, oh my God, what if we've got it? We're gonna die, So they were having as many people as possible take the test. Does that sound familiar? You notice how Tony and friends want everybody to take that COVID test? Why? The more times they give it, the more false positives they'll get, the more cases they'll have. You notice how the cases are always rising and rising. You know what it takes to become a COVID case? We think, God, the guy's in the hospital. He's got the pipe down his neck. I mean, he's going out any minute. No. If you got a fever and a dry cough, somebody can just declare that you are a COVID case. Even if you've got allergies or you've got, hay fever, or you've got a cold, or you've got some other flu. That's one way you can be a case. Another way you can be a case is they give you one of these bogus tests and you happen to come up positive. Now you're a case. So when you see 10,000 cases in one day or 1 million cases, it's unbelievable. It's all bullshit. And the same thing with the AIDS test. There were people that had the real disease, the real horrible disease of AIDS, it's a syndrome of diseases. It's quite terrible. And they had no HIV when you gave them the HIV test. And then you had people that were HIV positive, and they're still around 40 years later, and they've never had a sick day in their lives. So if it sounds illogical that that's possible, it is illogical. That's not how biology works. That's not how medicine works. But somehow, unfortunately, Fauci perfected this reality distortion zone. If anybody's ever heard that saying attributed to people like not Bill Gates, but Steve Jobs. They always talked about Steve Jobs having a reality distortion zone, right? If he wanted something to happen, it was going to happen. Sometimes that's really positive. Sometimes it's really negative. Well, in the case of Tony Fauci, it's really, really negative. He has a reality distortion zone. By the way, I would look at this as a, the internet added, I don't know, $50 trillion in value to the world economy, and Tony Fauci just set fire to about $50 trillion in the world economy. So it's just a way, little yin yang there. So we've got fake tests. We've got people that are told they're positive when it doesn't mean anything. We've got people told they're a case when it doesn't mean anything. Then the other trick they played with AIDS, that they are playing with COVID. See, listen, you can't have a scam without a scammer, right? If there's a scam, there's got to be a scammer, right? And a scammer can't be a scammer without a playbook. So we know who the scammer is. The scammer is Tony Fauci. And I'm telling you what his playbook is, because this is the same thing he did in the 1980s and with a whole bunch of other diseases. It's just that, not every sales letter is a hit. Not every medical scam is a hit. AIDS was his greatest hit. Now he's got, the ultimate hit. But the expansion, diagnosis creep. Originally, they said AIDS was two diseases, this fungal infection of the lungs or Kaposi sarcoma, but in the nose and so on. But then they said, you know what? I think there's a whole bunch of other diseases that are AIDS too. And by the time they finished adding diseases to the syndrome, 29 different diseases, all of which had existed before, all of which had known etiologies. In other words, they came from other sources, and many of which had cures, all suddenly became AIDS. So if you had any one of these 29 diseases, you've got AIDS. So that's how they took this small number of people who had a real problem. I mean, this was, that was not make-believe. The problem they had was real and it was serious. But what they did was they blew up the number of people through fraud, which is exactly what they're doing with COVID, right? Somebody's got stage 4 cancer, diabetes, dementia, they get hit by a truck and shot in the head, and if they've got COVID antibodies, that's going to be COVID on the death certificate. Now, I'm kind of exaggerating, but I'm kind of not. All of a sudden, everything's an example of COVID. Every death of any person is now a COVID death, practically. So that was a trick they played back in the 80s and 90s and still playing it. And they just dusted off the playbook and they're doing it again. And what's the point of this game? Well, back in the 80s, they came out with a formerly failed drug, something called AZT. I think it was originally developed for cancer. It was so toxic that it was abandoned as a drug. It was just too dangerous. The FDA toxicology expert, don't know his name offhand, but it's in the film, came out and said this should not be given to human beings. Guess what? Tony Fauci and company gave it to human beings. And they created a stampede of demand. Do you think there may be, given how many people are out of their minds with fear and hysteria and panic over this, non-entity of a pandemic, how many people, once that vaccine arrives, are going to be clamoring for it? A lot. So I hate to use this comparison, but it fits. In speaking from the stage, the whole goal is to do your presentation in such a way that people do not know they're being sold. And when you're finished speaking, they all run to the back of the room to buy your book or your tapes or whatever the heck you're selling. And Tony Fauci, he's the best at it that ever lived. Unfortunately, he does it in the service of evil. I'm going to say it. It's evil. It's evil. If you look at his career, he is forever attributing all disease to infections of viruses or antivirals. And there's a lot of other ways to interpret disease. There's environmental causes. There's lifestyle causes. I think people that drink, smoke, take drugs, snort poppers, are out all night, develop, venereal diseases of all kinds frequently, are living on antibiotics as some of these guys were. I think that's a lifestyle problem that's going to lead to immune system collapse. I think that's pretty clear. But Tony Fauci's not having any of that. It's got to be a virus. It's got to be a virus. It's got to be transmissible. It's got to be transmissible in such a way that it's sneaky. You think it's over here, but then it's over there. And it's got to be the kind of virus that everybody's going to get. And it's got to be fatal. It's going to kill you. It's going to get you. Unless you take AZT or whatever else he cooks up. Now, they've somehow, thank God, decided to limit that. I mean, not thank God for the people who are being destroyed by it, but for the sake of larger humanity, they have decided, well, we're just going to focus this particular genocide on some poor Africans, some African Americans, and some gay males. We'll just keep the game on that level, but not with COVID. We've seen, if you haven't seen, you really should see the videos I've made. Bill Gates is very clear. Everybody's going to get this vaccine. We're not going back. He said it. He said it. He said it. I'm not even paraphrasing it. We cannot go back to normal until we've been globally vaccinated. Then he and others are talking about a vaccine certificate, so that if you want to get on a plane, or you want to go to another country, or you want to return to your country, or any place where they could have a reader, which apparently you're going to be able to read these little passport things with a smartphone, which means there could be somebody at the restaurant, at a supermarket, your hairdresser, your barber might have one, and he'll say, sorry buddy, no haircut for you. You didn't get the vaccine. That's where this is leading. That's where this is leading, and it's premeditated. And it's hard to believe there are people this twisted and evil in the world who don't have horns growing out of their heads. But sometimes that's the nature of evil. Looks like grandpa giving good sage advice. If this all sounds crazy, it's all backed up in the videos that I've made. 90% of it is coming out of the mouths of experts and Fauci himself. He said, he's hung himself, if anybody bothers to even look. And apparently, nobody's looking. But, when people call this a scam, you're right. It's not just an instinct. It is a scam. But when there's a scam, it's logistics, right? We're business people. Businesses run on logistics. Ideas are a dime a dozen, right? Genius is useless. You need logistical execution. So if there's going to be a scam, there has to be a scammer. And if there is a scammer, he's got to have a playbook. He's got to have a methodology. And the scammer is Tony Fauci. And the methodology, we've seen it with AIDS, but we also saw it with swine flu. And I made a film about that. Same damn thing. So here we are with this. What do we do with it? I don't know. I did the research. I'm telling you. Maybe you'll tell other people. Maybe bit by bit, more and more people will understand this. They'll go beyond the instinct. I think a lot of people's instincts are quite sound. It didn't make sense. Didn't quite smell right. I think everybody, to me, this is proof that the average person is a really cooperative, helpful person that wants to look out for his neighbors. I think that's what this proved. It also proves that we got some really demented, evil people at the top running things for their own benefit. And, history goes in cycles, and, we've gone through a long period of complacency. And maybe now's the time for everybody to wake up and start looking around and saying, maybe business as usual is no good anymore. Maybe I need to learn something about health. Maybe when I get fed a line of bull from a doctor, and Fauci's not the only doctor full of shit out there, by the way. There are many others, not all of them, but many, many others. Maybe I need to check things. I was talking with Doberman Dan about this. People that will get a fatal diagnosis and they fold that day. It's common, and I understand it. It's terrifying, but you know what? There's books, there's internet, there's your brain, and then there's the power of nature. So we're all going to die, and we're all going to die the same way. The body's going to stop working. So just understand that. Like, there's no out. There's no out. And there's no doctor in the world that's going to be able to stop it. Okay? But in the meantime, we have a lot of control about how we live and what we do to ourselves, And we don't have to go along with the Tony Fauci's of the world. We can see through it. We can see beyond it. Remember this. You're alive because countless generations of tough sons of bitches survived long enough to bring you into the world. Okay? You got their genes. All right, we may have screwed things up almost beyond recognition, but we still have all that, inbuilt stuff. It didn't disappear in a generation. We may have to revitalize it, but it's still there. And that's your birthright. That's why you're here. You are an example of people who faced it all and won. A book I'm going to recommend that everybody read. It's interesting reading, and it will give you perspective on all this stuff. It's called Virus Mania, and it talks about the history of virus manias, and it talks about the whole issue of viruses and bacteria and all these things. Every day we're swimming in an ocean of viruses and bacteria. They don't kill us. If we wear ourselves down, they might get the better of us temporarily, but 99.9% of the time we neutralize them without even thinking about it. And according to I don't know really how it all works, but according to immunology, you need all this, you need all this immunological friction to be healthy. They did an experiment. They took mice and they put them in an absolutely sterile environment, sterile food, sterile air, sterile floor, sterile ceiling, they were dead within 3 days. We're not built that way. We're kind of messy creatures, and we're meant to kind of be in the muck, and we can handle it, and it actually makes us stronger. So hope this helps, but let's, going back to where this started, it's June 8th, and the World Health Organization came out. Now they're going to backpedal on it. They're going to spin it. Fauci's going to come out with a new line of bullshit. NBC and CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post are going to try to dilute what this woman said. But the head of infectious diseases for the World Health Organization came out and clearly said asymptomatic carriers of the virus, in other words, it's so weak you don't even know you got it, those people aren't spreading anything, which means we can take the masks off, we can open businesses again, and we can get back to life and rebuilding and repairing the very, very, very significant damage that this band of con artists did to our world. And we all got to be smarter and stronger. A lot of good people have been hurt by this. If you're on dry land, if you're on solid ground, look around, see who you can help. Food banks are an easy one. They're reliable usually. They don't waste money. They actually, they get $10 out of every dollar you give them. They're really good that way. They're run by volunteers. You never hear of the head of a food bank, staying in the Ritz-Carlton with his girlfriend, like the head of the Red Cross did a couple of years ago. They're hardworking people that are doing the most important thing on earth, which is making sure people have food on their table. And then there may be vendors and stuff that in your town. I learned that my local printer, 90% of his business was churches and the college, the local college. So I can turn printing projects on and off, and I decided to do a ton of printing projects. No big deal for me. I'll probably end up making money. By the way, you should be in people's mailboxes now. Have you noticed? Nobody's mailing. Idiots. And I'm saying you're an idiot, but I'm saying that the fact that people aren't mailing right now is crazy. This is the best time to do direct mail in the history of direct mail, and nobody's doing direct mail. So that's a way, for instance, you could help a local vendor, like a local printer, keep some income coming in. It's just a matter of looking around and being creative and asking questions. You may not be in a position to do things like that. Okay, that's all right. But if you are, we really all have to pull together to help the small business people. Like when the restaurants open, assuming they don't make you wear a mask, and assuming the servers aren't wearing masks and gloves up to that, because anybody that's doing that, they're not getting my business. But if somebody's doing business in a sane way, spend more money on things like that than you ever have before. Help kickstart some of these businesses again. It's going to be the small business people that bring this back. It's not going to be the government. It's not going to be Tony Fauci. It's not going to be the Fed. It's going to be small business people. So, we got to put our thinking caps on and be super creative, super productive, and help lift up those people who are knocked down by this insanity. So that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. And see you later.